My name is Logan Hale, and for 33 nights, I lived the same dream. Not similar dreams, not variations on a theme, but the exact same dream, playing out like a broken record that refused to move to the next track. By the time it ended, I understood that some dreams aren't meant to entertain us while we sleep. Some dreams are prison cells built from our own forgotten memories, and the only way out is through a door we've been too afraid to open for decades. It started on a Tuesday in March. I remember because I just finished a particularly demanding project for a tech startup, designing their entire visual identity from scratch. I'm a graphic designer by trade, 35 years old, living alone in a converted loft in downtown Portland. My life had settled into comfortable predictability work during the day, Netflix and takeout in the evening, 8 hours of usually dreamless sleep. I liked it that way. Routine felt safe, controllable, unlike the chaos of my childhood that I'd spent years trying to forget. That first night, I found myself standing on an empty street in a city I'd never seen, but somehow recognized. The architecture was familiar, yet wrong, like a photograph that had been subtly altered. Victorian houses stood next to Art Deco buildings, while modern glass towers rose impossibly high into a star-filled sky. Street lamps cast pools of amber light that seemed to bend and twist as I watched, and every clock I could see on buildings, in shop windows, on church towers, showed the same time, 3:33 a.m. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no wind, no distant hum of city life. Just my footsteps echoing off empty pavement and the steady, rhythmic chiming of a clock tower somewhere in the distance, marking time that never seemed to pass. I walked for what felt like hours, exploring streets that led to more streets, all of them empty, all of them frozen in that eternal moment between night and dawn. I was lucid from the beginning, aware that I was dreaming, but unable to control anything. Usually, when I realized I was in a dream, I could fly or change the scenery or wake myself up. But here, I was just an observer in my own unconscious mind, following streets that seemed to know where they wanted to take me, even if I didn't. When I woke up that first morning, I felt like I'd been traveling for days. The dream clung to me through breakfast, through my commute, through client meetings. I could still hear that distant clock tower, still feel the strange familiarity of those impossible streets. But dreams fade, even vivid ones, and by evening I'd mostly forgotten about it. Until it happened again. The second night was identical. Same empty city, same frozen time, same inexplicable sense of recognition. I walked the same streets, saw the same buildings, heard the same distant chiming. When I tried to take a different path, my feet seemed to have their own agenda, leading me along a route that felt predetermined, scripted. By the fourth night, I was taking notes. I'm a visual person by nature, so I started sketching what I remembered the layout of the streets, the architectural details, the way shadows fell, despite the absence of any visible light source. The drawings helped me realize something disturbing. The city wasn't random. It had logic, geography, a sense of place that suggested it existed somewhere beyond my imagination. The dreams continued with mechanical precision. Night after night, I found myself in that same eternal moment, walking those same empty streets, listening to that same distant clock tower. I tried everything I could think of to break the pattern. I attempted to fly, to teleport, to wake myself up through sheer force of will. Nothing worked. The dream held me like a closed fist, and all I could do was walk and observe and wait for something to change. By the 10th night, I was exhausted. The dreams were more tiring than being awake, and I found myself dreading sleep. I consulted my doctor, researched recurring dreams online, even considered seeing a therapist. But how do you explain to someone that you're trapped in a loop of your own unconscious creation? How do you ask for help escaping from yourself? Everything changed on the 12th night. I was walking down what I'd started thinking of as Main Street, a broad avenue lined with shops that had never been open. When I saw light spilling from a doorway I'd never noticed before. Not the amber glow of the street lamps, but warm, golden light that seemed to pulse with life. I approached carefully, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage, but the light remained steady. The door led into what looked like a small cafe, complete with round tables, mismatched chairs, and the lingering scent of coffee and old books. But it was the woman sitting by the window who made me stop breathing. She was maybe 30, with dark hair that seemed to move in a breeze I couldn't feel, and eyes that held depths I couldn't measure. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow with its own inner light, and when she looked up at me, her smile was both welcoming and infinitely sad. "Hello, Logan," she said, as if we were old friends meeting after a long absence. "I've been waiting for you. You know my name. I know many things about you. Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." I sat across from her, studying her face for any clue about who she might be or what she represented. "What is this place? Why am I here every night?" "My name is Leora," she said, ignoring my questions. "And this isn't just a dream, Logan. It's a holding pattern. A loop created by your own mind to protect you from something you're not ready to face." "Protect me from what?" "A memory. Something that happened when you were 8 years old. Something so traumatic that your conscious mind buried it so deep you've spent 27 years pretending it never existed." The coffee cup in my hands, when had I picked up a coffee cup, suddenly felt too heavy. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Part of you does, anyway. That's why you're here, walking these streets night after night. Your unconscious mind is trying to lead you somewhere, but your conscious mind keeps pulling you back. You're stuck between remembering and forgetting, and that's a dangerous place to be." She leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. "The city you're walking through isn't random, Logan. It's a map. Every street, every building, every shadow has meaning. You've been following the same route because it's leading you to something specific, but you have to choose to follow it to the end. What happens if I don't? You stay here forever, trapped in this loop, walking the same streets, living the same dream, while your real life withers away. I've seen it happen before. The mind can be its own prison when it's trying to protect itself from unbearable truths." I wanted to argue with her, to dismiss what she was saying as dream logic and wish fulfillment. But something about her words resonated with a frequency I felt in my bones. There was truth here, even if I couldn't see its shape yet. How do I get out? By going deeper in. By following the streets to where they want to take you. By remembering what you've chosen to forget. She stood up, and the cafe around us began to fade at the edges. "The dreams will change now, Logan. They'll become more intense, more specific. Don't fight them. Let them show you what you need to see." "Wait," I called out as she moved toward the door. "Who are you? How do you know about this?" She paused, her hand on the doorframe. "I'm the part of you that remembers everything, even the things you wish you could forget. And Logan, you only have 21 nights left. After that, the loop becomes permanent." I woke up with her words echoing in my mind, and the taste of coffee I'd never drunk lingering on my tongue. The 13th night was different. The city was the same, but now it felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Shadows moved when they shouldn't have. Windows flickered with light that vanished when I looked directly at it, and the distant clock tower seemed closer, its chiming more urgent. I found myself taking new routes, exploring side streets and alleyways that led deeper into the city's heart. The architecture became older as I walked, more weathered, until I was moving through neighborhoods that looked like they belonged in a different century entirely. By the 15th night, I was hearing whispers, voices carrying on wind that didn't exist, speaking words I almost but not quite understood. Children's voices, mainly, laughing and calling out in games whose rules I'd forgotten. The sound made something twist in my chest, a combination of longing and dread that left me waking up with tears on my cheeks. The 20th night brought smells. Wood smoke and summer rain, cut grass, and the metallic scent of playground equipment heating in the sun. Scents that transported me to a childhood I'd thought I barely remembered. To lazy afternoons and endless summers when the world had seemed safe and full of possibility. Each night, the sensory details became more specific, more personal. I started recognizing individual buildings, specific street corners. This wasn't just any abandoned city. It was a recreation of the neighborhood where I'd grown up, filtered through 27 years of partial memories and deliberate forgetting. On the 25th night, I saw him for the first time. A small figure at the end of a long street, barely visible in the amber glow of the street lamps. He was too far away to make out clearly, but something about his posture, the way he held his shoulders, sent electricity through my nervous system. I tried to approach him, but the streets seemed to stretch as I walked, keeping the distance between us constant. Each subsequent night, he appeared again, always just out of reach, always tantalizingly familiar. By the 30th night, I could see that he was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in the early 90s. He never moved, never waved, just stood there watching me with an expression I couldn't read from so far away. The 32nd night was when I finally got close enough to see his face. He looked exactly like I had at 8 years old. Same messy brown hair, same serious expression, same way of standing with one foot turned slightly inward. But there was something wrong with his eyes, something hollow and desperate that I'd never seen in a childhood photograph. He was holding something in his hand, a piece of paper that looked burned around the edges, charred and fragile, as if it had been pulled from a fire. When he saw me approaching, he held it out like an offering, his mouth moving in words I couldn't hear over the constant chiming of the clock tower. I reached for the paper, and the moment my fingers touched it, the world exploded into memory. I was 8 years old again, standing in the woods behind our house with my younger brother Danny. He was 6, all gap-toothed grins and boundless energy, the kind of kid who could find adventure in a cardboard box and magic in a puddle of rainwater. We'd been playing some elaborate game involving pirates and hidden treasure, using a map I'd drawn on a piece of notebook paper. "Read it again, Logan," Danny said, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Read the treasure map." I unfolded the paper, squinting at my own 8-year-old handwriting. X marks the spot where the pirate king buried his gold. But beware, the treasure is guarded by ghosts who steal away little boys who venture too close. Danny laughed, fearless as always. Ghosts aren't real. Come on, let's find the treasure. He ran ahead, deeper into the woods than we were supposed to go, following a path that led toward the old quarry our parents had warned us about a dozen times. I chased after him, calling for him to slow down, but Danny had always been faster than me, more reckless, more willing to push boundaries. I caught up with him at the edge of the quarry, where decades of limestone mining had left a deep pit filled with dark water. Danny was standing right at the edge, the treasure map clutched in his small fist, peering down into the depths with fascination. "Look how deep it is," he said. "Maybe the treasure is down there, like a real underwater cave." "Danny, get back from there," Mom said. But he was already leaning forward, trying to get a better look, and the rain-slicked limestone under his feet gave way. I watched my little brother fall into the quarry, watched him disappear beneath the dark water with barely a splash. I screamed his name, ran to the edge, looked down at water that showed no sign of disturbance, as if it had swallowed him completely. I should have run for help immediately. Should have sprinted home and gotten our parents, called 911, done something useful. Instead, I stood there paralyzed by shock and guilt, clutching the stupid treasure map I'd drawn, the game that had led us to this forbidden place. By the time I finally ran home and stammered out what had happened, By the time the rescue crews arrived with their boats and divers and equipment, it was too late. They searched for 3 days before declaring Danny's body lost, probably swept into one of the underwater caves that connected the quarry to the river system. Our family fell apart after that. My parents divorced within a year, both of them consumed by grief and blame. I was shuttled between relatives, eventually ending up in foster care when neither parent could bear to look at me without seeing Danny's absence. The treasure map, the piece of paper that had started it all, was burned along with most of Danny's belongings, a ritual destruction of memories too painful to preserve. But apparently, not all of it had burned. And apparently, not all of it had been forgotten. Standing in that impossible dream city, holding the charred remains of a child's treasure map, I finally understood what Leora had been trying to tell me. The recurring dreams weren't random neural firing. They were my mind's way of leading me back to this moment, this memory, this guilt I'd buried so deep it had taken 33 nights of patient excavation to uncover. The child version of myself looked at me with eyes full of accusation and grief. "You let him fall," he whispered. His voice carried on wind that smelled like summer rain and disappointment. "You drew the map that led him there. You let our little brother die." I was 8 years old, I said, but the words felt hollow even to my own ears. I was just a kid. I didn't know. "You knew the quarry was dangerous. You knew we weren't supposed to go there, but you drew the map anyway. You made it into a game." The dream city around us began to crumble, buildings dissolving into dust and shadow. The frozen time of 3:33 Amiaside, moving forward, clock tower chimes accelerating into a frantic rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the child who was myself, to the brother who had never grown up, to the family that had shattered like glass on stone. "I'm so sorry." The child smiled then, an expression of forgiveness I'd never thought I deserved. "I know," he said. "That's why you're here. That's why you had to remember. Some guilt can only be healed by being faced, not by being forgotten." He pressed the burned treasure map into my hands one final time, and then everything went white. I woke up in my own bed, tears streaming down my face, the taste of quarry water in my mouth. But something felt different. The weight I'd been carrying without knowing it, the shadow that had followed me through 27 years of carefully constructed normal life, was gone. In its place was grief pure, clean grief for a little brother I'd loved and lost and forgotten in my desperate attempt to survive the aftermath. I got up and walked to my closet, to a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the few belongings I'd managed to keep from my childhood, things I'd told myself I held on to for sentimental reasons, but had never actually looked at. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, I found it. A piece of notebook paper, burned around the edges, covered in a child's careful handwriting. A treasure map drawn in crayon and imagination, leading to an X that marked not gold, but the spot where innocence dies and guilt is born. I held the map with shaking hands, remembering Danny's gap-toothed grin, his fearless laughter, the way he'd looked at me like I could do anything, be anything, lead him anywhere. The memory hurt in ways I'd forgotten memory could hurt, but it was a clean pain, honest and necessary. That afternoon, I saw a news story that made my hands tremble all over again. Construction workers expanding a shopping center had discovered human remains in a previously unknown cave system connected to the old quarry outside my hometown. DNA testing had identified the remains as belonging to Daniel Hale, aged 6, who had been missing for 27 years. They were bringing Danny home. I called my mother for the first time in 5 years. We cried together over the phone. Two people who had spent nearly 3 decades running from the same terrible day, finally ready to face it together. She told me she'd never blamed me, that the guilt I'd carried was mine alone, unnecessarily hoarded and carefully fed. "You were 8 years old, Logan," she said through her tears. You were just a little boy who wanted to play with his brother. What happened wasn't your fault. Maybe that's true. Maybe guilt is sometimes a choice we make, rather than a burden we're given. Maybe forgiveness starts with forgiving ourselves for being human, for being children, for making the kinds of mistakes that have consequences too big for small shoulders to carry. I never had the recurring dream again. The city with its frozen time and impossible architecture dissolved like morning mist, taking with it the prison I'd built from my own unprocessed grief. But sometimes in the space between sleeping and waking, I think I can still hear distant clock tower chimes marking time that finally learned how to move forward. They held Danny's funeral on a Saturday in April, a small service for a boy who had been gone so long that most people had forgotten he'd ever existed. But I remembered. I remembered his laugh, his fearlessness, the way he'd trusted me to keep him safe on adventures that took us places we shouldn't have gone. I buried the treasure map with him, that burned piece of paper that had carried my guilt for 27 years. Not because I wanted to forget again, but because some stories need proper endings, and some games need to finally be finished. The mind is a strange country, full of borders we draw for ourselves, and territories we refuse to explore. For 33 nights, I lived in a city built from avoidance and self-protection, walking streets that led nowhere because I was afraid of where they might take me. But in the end, the only way out was through. The only escape was acceptance. The only healing was in remembering what I'd tried so hard to forget. Danny would have been 33 this year, the same age I was when I finally found the courage to let him go. I think he would have liked that symmetry, would have found some kind of poetic justice in the numbers, adding up just right. He always did love puzzles, always believed that everything happened for a reason, even the terrible things that seemed too random and cruel to have meaning. Maybe he was right. Maybe some dreams are more than dreams, and some memories are too important to stay buried forever. Maybe the mind creates its own geography, its own time zones, its own weather patterns designed to lead us back to the places we need to visit, whether we want to or not. I sleep peacefully now, dreamlessly most nights. But I'm no longer afraid of dreams that feel too real, too specific, too much like messages from parts of myself I've forgotten. The unconscious mind knows things the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge, and sometimes the only way to bridge that gap is through the strange country of sleep, where time can freeze at 3:33 a.m. and stay frozen until we're finally ready to let it move forward again. Some loops are prisons, others are cocoons. And sometimes the only way to tell the difference is to stop fighting the pattern and trust that it's leading you exactly where you need to go.